Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Stunning photographic images will grace the Ward Museum's Art and Nature Photo Festival this Friday. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Salisbury University's Ward Museum opens its exhibition this weekend with stunning views of nature from professional and amateur photographers alike. From birds in flight to landscapes, the festival celebrates the Eastern Shore. In our studio this morning, we have Shaina Adkins. She's Director of Special Events at the Ward Museum. And also by phone, we have award-winning photographer Jay Fleming. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So let me first start with the festival. Shaina, tell us a little bit about the festival. How many photos are there, and how did this photo festival originate?
So the festival is in its 7th year. There's roughly 1,000 photos on display at the museum through the weekend. We have artists from all across the country mailing in their photos, and it's just a really great time, a great festival. It's beautiful.
So, and what kinds of photos do we have? What kind of range do we have?
So the photos can range. We have amateur, professional, and we also have a youth category. And the categories range from birds, plants and animals, landscapes, black and white, macro, micro. So really, I mean, just about anything you can find in nature can send us a photo.
So Jay, I want to turn to you and explain. And you're renowned photographer, National Geographic, and so on. How did you get interested in photography? I understand that from reading some of your bio that you kind of discovered it at an early age.
Yeah, I started shooting pictures when I was about 13 years old, right here on the Delmarva Peninsula. And my father, Kevin Fleming, who's also participated in the festival in the past, he's been a photographer in Delaware for over 40 years, and he was a major influence on me in my early years. And then recently I've kind of branched off on my own and started shooting stuff along the Chesapeake Bay, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland. And most recently I turned my lens to the working watermen of the Chesapeake Bay and, documenting how they make a living on the water. And I recently published a book called Working the Water, which kind of is an all-encompassing vignette of the seafood industry and how people make a living off the resources of the bay.
So what was it? Yeah, let me ask you this. So when you first started, what really intrigued you the most about photography? So
for me, when I first started shooting, photography was kind of a motivation to get out and explore. And really in my early years, I was primarily shooting wildlife on the coastal bays of Delmarva, from Rehoboth Bay all the way south to the Virginia Barrier Islands. But photography was really the motivation for me to get out and explore and, learn about what was in the environment where I grew up. And, I did a lot of wildlife photography, visiting these islands where these birds nest. We have an incredible abundance of birds on the Delmarva Peninsula. And it really was a wonderful place for me to learn about photography and to learn about different lighting and, timing and, all that sort of stuff.
Now, I understand, by the way, that you also did some photography in Yellowstone National Park. What was that like, and how did that contrast the kind of photography that you do on the Eastern Shore?
So Yellowstone was quite a different environment for me. I worked out there for the Park Service, operating a boat for them in 2011, 2012. And it was, you would think that I was landlocked out there, but I was actually on Yellowstone Lake, which is a huge body of water. And, I spent a lot of time out on the water there, but it was different. They didn't have like tides out there like we do here, and just the whole environment, like the terrain was extremely different from Delmarva, but it was a beautiful place to work and to live for 2 summers. And, I did a lot of underwater photography out there, and I was able to bring a lot of techniques and, things that I learned out there back here to the Chesapeake Bay. And I also focused a lot on shooting shooting images that would tell a story while I was out there, because I was working on this interesting program with the Park Service. We were catching non-native lake trout in Yellowstone Lake as an effort to suppress their population levels to bring back the cutthroat trout. And, I kind of turned my lens towards that conservation message. And that was a really, interesting thing for me to document out there. And the pictures became very, they became more than just beautiful pictures. They became very useful. And those shots ended up getting published by National Geographic when I returned from, when I returned from Yellowstone. And, that was kind of a defining moment for my photography, because it really, showed me how my pictures could be used for a conservation message and a storytelling message as well.
By the way, when you were out there, any particular shot or series of shots that really stand out to you?
I did a lot of photographs of these spawning cutthroat trout in the Lamar River, which was quite amazing. The cutthroat trout out in Yellowstone are still pretty abundant, but they're not as abundant as they were since the introduction of lake trout. But they run up in these streams and rivers to spawn, just kind of like salmon, and the numbers of them are incredible. And I was able to do a bunch of snorkeling and underwater photography with these fish, and also document the importance of these fish to other creatures for food. Like I was able to shoot pictures of these otters eating cutthroat trout that were spawning, which was a pretty amazing thing to see.
But now, obviously, you're moving around, and then in that territory, in Ansel Adams kind of territory. Did you ever think about him when you were out there?
Absolutely, yeah. The landscapes were quite amazing. But really, I wanted to focus on something that people hadn't done out there, and that was the underwater photography. There wasn't much underwater photography out there, and I was trying to create unique images, because in Yellowstone there are a ton of photographers, and for me, I always look for ways to differentiate my images from other photographers. So the underwater wildlife was my main focus.
So, as a matter of fact, just Ansel Adams, of course, was in that era of black and white photography. We're now, of course, in the era of not only color photography but digital photography as well. Did you experiment at all with black and white, and B, how do you see the contrast, the difference in the two mediums?
With black and white, like film and digital, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, black and white. Yeah, black and white as opposed to color. Yeah.
Well, black and white is definitely very different from color. When you're shooting, you're looking for different things. You're looking for, more contrast. You're looking for shapes, and you're looking for textures. With color, you're looking for those vibrant colors, saturated colors, that type of thing. So you're looking for different elements of your image that will help, display your subject the best.
Now, you obviously, yeah, go ahead.
As far as film goes, shooting with film, that's what I started with when I was 13 years old, and I feel like that kind of gave me a unique background into photography, because I was kind of right on the edge of the film and digital switchover, and I was able to get in on that at an early age. And shooting with film, you were limited to 36 exposures, and now with digital, you can go out and shoot hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures in one outing, and you don't have that restriction of 36 shots per roll, and it's definitely changed the way that photographers shoot. Digital revolution.
By the way, do you think there's any difference in the images?
There's definitely a big difference in image quality. A trained eye can tell the difference immediately between a film shot and a digital shot. I think film images have a very nice aesthetic appeal. Kind of got a grainier feel, looks a little bit older. The colors are a bit different. And I still actually shoot with film for that reason. I shoot with black and white film, just as kind of a personal thing that I do. And the black and white kind of adds like a nostalgic feel to an image. kind of a timeless feel in a sense.
And you came back here to shoot a lot of photography in terms of the Eastern Shore. What was that like coming back to really a much different environment than say the West? I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was out Yellowstone and some of the big, sort of the open sky kind of really of territory that the West is. When you come here, the world seems a little more confined because there's just a lot more things around you.
Yeah, it is when you're on the land, but when you get on the water and when you get on the marshes, the world kind of opens up, and that's primarily where I focus my shooting efforts, is on the water, and on these landscapes that are a little bit more open. And for me, coming back, like I really couldn't wait to get back from Yellowstone and start shooting here. I mean, I just love being on the Chesapeake Bay and being on the water, and it's just I'm very lucky that I'm able to live here and work here and shoot on the water here.
Do you find that there are more things to shoot here than, say, in the West?
I think so. I think there's a little bit more going on culturally out here than in the West. But I didn't spend as much time shooting out there as I do here. But really, the more that I get out here and the more that I shoot, the more I learn, and the more I find that I want to pursue as far as photography. With my book, Working the Water, when I started shooting this book in 2013, I really didn't know much about the seafood industry. And, the more I got out, the more I talked to people, the more networking that I did, the more I learned. And, the more inspired I became to pursue it and, dig deeper and deeper into the subject matter.
How important do you think it is when you're shooting something like that to really understand the culture, the people that you're shooting, to get the kind of image that you want?
I think it's extremely important. It's almost just as important as getting out and shooting. Understanding your subject will help you shoot better images.
And any stand out to you of the people that you shot there on the water?
Well, in particular, I did a lot of shooting for the book, and I still do a lot of shooting on Smith Island and Tangier Island. And understanding that like cultures like that are so unique, being able to interact with the people and being able to, explore the subject in the right way, I think, definitely makes a huge difference in your photography. As a rule of thumb, I tell people that, 1 hour shooting should equal 1 hour research before you go out shooting. So, spending time thinking about what you're shooting, thinking about your approach, how you're going to shoot it, thinking about what light you're going to use, that's all very important. That's all stuff that, people should think about before they actually go out shooting to kind of maximize their effort when they're out there.
And how important is it to try to create a rapport, as it were, with the subject? And how do you go about doing that, especially for people that you don't necessarily know well? They may come from a culture or community that perhaps is not as receptive, or might look upon you with maybe just a slight certain apprehension or thoughtfulness about who you are and how you relate to them. How do you break into that in that rapport?
Well, it can take a while, and it did take me a while to get in with the seafood industry. But, over time, people became aware of what I was doing and what my intentions were. And, as a photographer and as a photojournalist, you really have to approach your subject matter objectively if you want to maintain access to the subject. And, you really don't want to bring any images across, bring any opinions across through your images, but let people make their opinions through your images. So being objective is very important.
Do you withhold maybe some judgment or try to erase some kind of prior judgment in terms of trying to relate to these people then?
Absolutely. I kind of come to the table with an open mind, and I just, I like to listen to people before I make opinions, and understand both sides of the story before making a judgment. And with my images and what I write about my images and what I put out there on the social media or into my books, that type of thing, I describe it as just, documenting what's happening, not creating a subjective opinion.
By the way, now, in terms of shooting, particularly some of the captains and some of the sea people, watermen, any particular person stand out? I thought I saw a picture of Sonny Whitelock. I might be wrong about that, but it certainly looked like it certainly looked like him. Any people stand up?
The cigarette in his mouth.
Exactly. Yes, I saw that. I said I know that guy. Yes. Any stand out like Stoney or those people or what?
Stoney's, obviously a great guy, and he's a huge proponent of the skipjacks and the oyster industry. Another great person from Deal Island is Art Daniels. He actually just passed a few months ago, but Art was the main inspiration for my book, Working the Water. He was 93 years old when he stopped working. He was running the skipjack city of Crisfield, but Art was incredibly inspirational for my book. He opened a lot of doors for me with different people on Deal Island, which eventually led to getting out on the water with people all over the bay. Because it's really amazing, how some of these people who work in the water, they really know people up and down the Chesapeake Bay. It's a really strong community, and it's really incredible to see that in this day and age, where I feel like a lot of people, especially in Annapolis, Baltimore, different areas like that, they don't really understand where the community where they're living or the culture where they're living. But, people who work on the water, they've got a long history of, I don't know how you would say it, but they've got a long history of understanding the people that live around them.
They also struck me, by the way, as extremely independent. I said this the other day to somebody that coming from the West, they remind me actually of the cowboy in the sense that the cowboy's got his horse and herd, and the waterman's got his crew and his boat, as it were. I mean, it seems they're very. I mean, could you really capture that kind of sense of independence and self-reliance that you often see from some of these folks?
A lot of these guys are very independent. And, they really wouldn't want to work for somebody else and have like a real boss, so to speak. They're out there on their own terms, on their own hours, and that's not saying that it's not a lot of hard work. It's probably even harder work than working for somebody else and coming to work and sitting at a desk, so to speak. But a lot of these guys are very independent and wouldn't have it any other way.
In
terms of like relating it to like cowboys in the West, I think the two are probably very similar in the sense that they're both, they're working off the land, they're working off the water, that type of thing. So they really are kind of salt of the earth.
Any particular shot, by the way, from that those photos that stand out to you?
I have one shot from Working the Water. It's in the winter gill netting chapter. It's of a waterman named Eddie Cummings from Tillman Island, and his entire face is like covered in ice. And we were out gill netting in the shipping channel off Tillman, and weather was really rough, and that image to me just kind of shows like what these guys go through and what it takes in order for them to make a living. Like they're out, on the worst of days, fishing, oystering, etc. And that's just to be able to pay their bills, to support their family, and to be able to bring that seafood to our tables.
I want to turn, by the way, to the wildlife here on the shore. How difficult is it to shoot wildlife? I mean, wildlife are moving targets. I mean, I did some photography in my younger years, in which did a lot of, still life. And one of the things that struck me is that, unlike still life, you can't say, move the bird somewhere. It's wherever it is. How do you figure out how to position yourself when you come upon a photograph, and how much do you anticipate what you're going to be seeing?
Well, my approach with wildlife photography is to really pick a location and pick a subject. And usually the location is an area where I know I can find that particular subject. So, for example, with birds, Delmarva has an incredible variety of birds that live in and around the Chesapeake Bay. And, some of these islands out like Smith and Tangier Island or Hollins Island, are really great spots to find these birds, in particular in the spring, summer, and fall. And actually, with the Ward Museum, after the keynote speech that I'm giving on Friday, I'm taking out 10 photographers to Smith Island, and we're going to be exploring the marshes and creeks of the island, and primarily trying to find some birds, in particular pelicans, which are nesting out on Smith Island.
By the way, any particular bird you favor over any others in terms of shooting, or anything that stands out for you?
I really enjoy shooting egrets and herons. I think we have a huge variety of egrets and herons on Delmarva, and some of them are just incredibly beautiful, really elegant birds.
Now, and finally, when you're out there and you're shooting, I mean, what are, in terms of your mental state, are you sort of in this zone, in this quiet place? What's the mindset like when you're actually out there shooting and doing that kind of photography?
Yeah, usually I'm trying to be relatively quiet, not move around a lot. When you're shooting wildlife, you want to kind of blend into their environment as much as possible and be as unintrusive as possible. So you're going to want to be quiet. You're going to want to wear clothing with, somewhat dull colors like camouflage, and just kind of blend into the bird's environment and, just be an observer of what they're doing, basically.
Do you shut everything else out except that visual component?
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of position yourself according to where you think the light's going to be the best, and just kind of try to blend in as well as possible.
So I've noticed that I think you mentioned that there are sort of three things I think that you've talked about in terms of for photography. One is patience, preparation, and researching potential opportunities. Explain a little bit about those and how you came to the conclusion that these are really the elements that you need in order to produce some good photography.
Well, we'll start with the research portion, because that's usually the first portion that kind of comes into play. Like I said, an hour of research is equivalent to an hour of time in the field, and just refining your way of approach to the subject and thinking about it before you actually go out will help you take better pictures and will help you, maximize your effort when you're out there. And the patience, patience getting out there, patience waiting for the right light, and, not getting discouraged if it doesn't happen the first time. You might have to go out a second time or a third time, and that's happened to me. For example, shooting for my book, there were certain fisheries that I went out and, shot 3 or 4 times before I really got what I wanted. But, I wasn't discouraged, and you never know when you're going to get the right image. It could happen instantly, right when you get to your shooting location, or it could take hours or days. And then, execution would be the final step, and knowing how to properly use your camera and use your settings as well as possible to get the best images that you can. That's the final step, and usually the execution portion happens really quickly, but you have to be able to know how to use your camera when you need to. Otherwise, all that work into the preparation, the patience, etc., is not going to be worth your time.
Just quickly, by the way, so we haven't talked about printing. Is this just a matter then of finding the right shot and then simply printing, as opposed to doing anything to the photograph itself?
Well, as far as printing goes, I should say printing and displaying your work, you really need to, there's multiple steps involved. You really need to be able to edit your images down to select the ones that you want to display and select what images are going to be best for the purpose which you're displaying. For example, for my book, Working the Water, I took 330,000 pictures in 3 years on hundreds of different shoots. And for my book, I published 300 images from those 330,000. So an incredible amount of work went into editing those images, editing them down, calling them, so to speak. And, once I had called them down to the images that were going to make it into the book, we had to, retouch them and, kind of like bring out the contrast or adjust the saturation, so to speak. But yeah, that's a whole nother process. And then printing them is an entirely different process as well. So there's a lot involved. It's not just going out and clicking the shutter. There's a lot involved before you do that, and then there's a lot involved after you do that.
Shaina, I want to just turn you one more time. So the event takes place this coming Friday. Tell us a little again about real quickly.
So registration is Friday morning. The doors open at 10 a.m. or 10 to 3. You can walk in with your photos and we'll walk you step by step through the registration process. And then following registration, Jay's keynote is from 6 to 9. It's $5 for non-members and our members are free. And then the next day we'll open up with seminars. Jay's workshop is going to be taking place that morning. Some food. We'll have a good weekend.
Okay. We've been talking to Shaina Adkins. She's Director of Special Events, the Ward Museum. Also, Jay Fleming, award-winning photographer, National Geographic, amongst others. And Jay, we appreciate you joining us by phone there. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.